Hello, so this is a screencast on build scripting for JavaScript. So what is build scripting? So it allows you to automate the tasks that take your source code to create deployable release code. And so from my days as a Flex developer, I would compile AS3, ActionScript 3 code and compile that into SWFs. So with JavaScript, you can compile your JavaScript. It's not really compiled, but you can compress them into minimized files, and you might have seen it if you've looked into, say, the source code of jQuery or Google Analytics or pretty much most JavaScript libraries out there. The build scripts that I'll be looking at in this presentation are written in Ant, which is another neat tool, and it's basically an XML file that gets read by a Java program, and it's a bit like running DOS commands in a bat file, something like that, but it's a lot more powerful, as hopefully you'll see as we go through this screencast. So why would you bother with build scripting? I think this first point is the most important point. It's so that you can write the code in the way that you want to write it, so you don't have to worry about the classes that you're writing, or in this case the JavaScript files that you're writing, and making sure that they're going to be, say, obfuscated, so that when you go to release them, people can't very easily work out what you've done if that's something that you want to do, or say if you're just trying to compress them, then you want to write code that's self-documenting is kind of a nice term, but really it's code that's understandable, verbose, proper variable names, everything's nice and neat and tidy. And if you always had to write releasable JavaScript code or release level JavaScript code, you might end up having to write very difficult to read code as well. And something that I'm very keen on as well is actually writing all my JavaScript files like I would write ActionScript 3 classes sets. Each JavaScript class thing is actually in its own script file, and then sort of bringing them all in together at the end. And so I don't want to compromise the way that I want to work, but I still want to obviously be able to deploy sensible code at the end of it. Also, just debugging like your verbose self-documenting code is a lot easier than trying to debug minimized code. And I just have can code the way you want written down twice because it's that important. And then when it comes to deployment, so if you were coding the way you wanted to code, and if you were like me and you had every single JavaScript class in its own JS script file, it's perfectly legitimate to include, say, 100, 200 JavaScript files if you want when someone hits your page. But the problem with that is that each HTTP request does actually take a bit more time, so it will mean that your whole page loads a little bit slower than if you were just to sort of concatenate them all into one file, and then just load just the one file with the one HTTP request for all of your classes. It also obviously speeds up your page load anyway, just because after those files have been concatenated, they'll be run through like a JavaScript minimizing tool. I actually use one by Yahoo called YUI compression, but there's JSMin, which is very popular as well. And yeah, just cutting down on the amount of bandwidth that your site is actually needing, which I think is going to be much more important as we write more and more complex JavaScript based websites. You don't really want to be getting into the level of 2 or 3 meg of JavaScript to download before you can start using something. So yeah, compressing all those scripts I think is going to be very important practice to get into. And then finally, if you can get your automatic versioning system also happening through automated build scripts, then that's going to be great. One really nice thing is that if your JS files and your CSS files all have version numbers actually within the actual file name, it means that effectively they won't be cached when you release new versions onto your QA server or whatever, or just even if you're just developing locally through localhost, you can avoid a lot of caching problems. So that's why you would bother. So what am I going to actually talk about here? So I'm going to show you how I've set up a project, a JavaScript project in IntelliJ. I'm going to show you the HTML template files that I've set up, and I've sort of been inspired by how I would write in, say, Flash Builder, doing an ActionScript project where you have a HTML.template file which is used effectively to build up your main releasable HTML wrapper. So I'm going to be I've taken sort of ideas from that and I've sort of tweaked them a little bit, and I'll show you what I've done there. Then I'll show you the actual build script, and really the build script sort of comes down to sort of three main steps that it really does. So it prepares a load of release files. It does your versioning for you, and like I say, the versioning just gives you cache control, which is quite a nice side effect of it. So not only obviously it's quite good for yourselves if you want to make sure that as JavaScript applications get more complicated, you might need to have proper version control, like version management and stuff like that. But then you also get the cache control, which is really nice. And then finally, the how to collate and compress CSS and JavaScript using the Yahoo compressor tool. So that's kind of what the build script will do. And then once hopefully you understand what the build script is doing, I'll show you how to set up dev and release build configs in IntelliJ, so that effectively from IntelliJ you can kick off those ANT tasks as you try and do a release build. And then if you're just doing dev work, you don't necessarily need to be doing all the versioning and the compression stuff until you're happy to go for a release. Okay. So let's have a look at some code. So this is my IntelliJ project. Let's just close everything down. So what we have, so in the root there's the actual build script, and I'll go into that in a bit more detail later. But first of all, let's have a look at the actual source code. So actually going down from the top, so we've got the .idea project is just how IntelliJ knows where all the files are, so don't worry about that. So the ant folder is where I keep all the ant specific stuff other than the build.xml. The build.xml has to stay in the root. Bin release is the release version of my code base. Those of you who are Flash developers probably recognise the name that I've used there. And then source is just where all of my source files go. So what I've got in my source, as you can see, there's quite a lot of files here. A lot of these files are taken from HTML5 boilerplate, which just gives you a nice starting place to go for your HTML5 projects. It's worth checking out. But then I've got an assets folder in here, and then in my assets folder I've got a load of CSS files, and these are kind of, conceptually, these are the static CSS files. Okay, so these are the ones that come from, say, data table or different themes that you might be trying to apply through jQuery theme roller. I've got an images directory, so whatever images that I might have that I want in my release. And then finally I've got a JS folder in here, and in the JS folder I've got a libs subfolder, and in there I've got all the various third-party JavaScript libraries. So all of this stuff in the assets folder are static assets that, although my project needs them, they're not sort of, that's not where my code and stuff goes. All my code is going in here so I'm using flex coding convention package naming, really. So UK, DK, and then the project that I'm on in here. And then as you see, I've got loads of different classes in here. So quite a few stuff. So as you can see, it can get fairly sizable. Each one should be fairly small. That's why this is the way I like to code. I like to have. I think that you can never have too many classes, but it's very easy to have a class that does way too much stuff, and that's when you start getting into really complicated classes that are difficult to get your head around. Whereas if you just break it all up into nice small little chunks, like I'm doing here, it just makes life a lot easier. But obviously with that there's the one bad side effect, that you actually have to import all of these things to get your project to work, and like I mentioned before, that means it can slow down the page load. So this is where the build scripting comes in to sort of combat that. So this is the way I like to code JavaScript, and I like to code JavaScript this way because this is how I would code any Flash or Flex project. And I want to take what I know from my Flash and Flex development and try and apply that to what I do in JavaScript. Also, just worth noting as well, I've got CSS files also sort of buried in my code base. So again, I sort of see that the CSS should be treated in the same way, in that you want to be able to sort of have it all nice and separate. So right, well, these are the styles that are specific to this asset picker screen thing, whatever that is. and then these are the styles that are just for the loading screen. And although they're not very much in themselves, it's just going to be a lot nicer to work with than if we just shoved absolutely everything into one CSS and you have to keep sort of scrolling through all that thing. And again, this is all towards just making development easier. This is not going to impact on release, because on release this is all going to get all this stuff is going to get combined, and I'll show you how that happens. So what we have, let's have a look at the index.development.html. So I've got these two index pages here. So I've got index.development.html and index.template.html. So what I was thinking with this, so index.template.html is a naming convention from Flash Builder, and so that is your template HTML page that whenever you build a project in Flash Builder, it would create your HTML wrapper based from that file. So it has some parameters in it which it will do some funky replacing with, and it will give you a nice index page, or whatever you called it, in your bin release folder. So I'm using those sort of same techniques, that same idea, but I've come up with this index.development.html page as well. And what this includes, so let's close all that, oops, open that back up. So right from the start, conceptually what index.development.html is it should be a totally working file, so I should be able to just go into Safari. Where's Safari gone? There we go, I'll just move that back up here. So index.development.html just works just fine out of the box. This is my application, it doesn't really matter what the thing is, but just so we're actually looking at, so here we go, in here, index.development.html. So that just works out of the box. And what we've got, so we've got all the various third-party scripts that are coming in. So this is all in the head of the page here, and in the release version, all scripts are actually in the at the end of the body for faster page loading. But I've put some of the scripts in the head, and a load of CSS as well is in the head. So these are all the third-party static stuff in that assets folder. So this is all living in the head. And the reason for that is that my Ant script actually passes this HTML document as an XML document and looks for all of the script tags in the body and all the CSS files in the body, and it's those files that it will actually concatenate and minimize. So by putting these ones in the head, it means that these are left alone, and because I don't want to be concatenating and minimizing, you know, jQuery libraries and all that sort of stuff. We'll just leave all the third-party stuff alone as separate files. I think that's a good way of working. What else we have is we have just the title of the page, and I've just put the word development page in here, just trying to be nice and sort of clear that this is not the one that should be going on deployment, just in case someone else is doing a deployment. Hopefully they pick that up. Don't worry about all this stuff here. This is to do with the Agility JS MVC framework, but the stuff I'm really talking about in this screencast would work for any JavaScript framework. Okay, so what we've got is, notice here we're now in the body tag, and we're now, so I've got these style sheets here, and these are all pointing at my UKDK asset selector styles. And so what happens here is I'm using Ant scripts to parse this actual file, look for all of the style sheets or these link tags in the body, and those are the ones that get combined and concatenated together. And then this is the same for the scripts, and this is even more important because index.development.html works in a browser de facto. So what it does, you use this as your main development playground kind of thing, and in here you'd have, you have to, with JavaScript, you have to make sure that all your files are loaded in the correct order because, for instance, like the event bus, well, the actor has to know about the event bus, therefore the event bus has to be included before the actor. So the order in which you include your JavaScript files is actually important with JavaScript development. So then by actually using an actual working HTML page that you use for development to list all of the various different JS files, I think it's quite an elegant solution, because it means obviously if your development page works, and the build script is always going to be behaving. And as you can see, I've got the rest of my stuff here. I've tried to separate out core and my main stuff, but effectively any script tag in the body will get combined together. And then finally I've got some code which just kicks off my application. and then I've got some Google Analytics stuff at the end. And to be honest, that doesn't even need to be here because this is really just the development version. So this file will never get onto the deployment server. In fact, the Ant script actually deletes it from the bin release when it gets copied over. So so this is this file. But then we also have index.template. Now index.template, oh, that's quite handy. We're actually started at the bottom. So we've got the Google Analytics tag here. We've got the code that does the kickoff. So just have a look at that. So we've got the kickoff code here. So document, it says a jQuery ready handler, and it does something. So that's how my application starts up. But you see here, we've now got this. In the index.development, we've got loads and loads of script files. Whereas in index.template, we've now got one script file, asset.js, and then compiled script, which can't be resolved because it's that's like a placeholder that's going to get replaced out. And then finally, remember we're still in the body tag in the index.template. I've got all of the third-party script libraries now in here because this is a better place to put your JavaScripts just so that your page loads up a bit faster. Then you can have whatever you want in your body. It's an important thing actually worth noting that because index.development.html is parsed by Ant only can parse it as long as it's a valid, well-formed XML document. So if you started doing anything that you didn't have your closing slash there, or you didn't have a matching script tag, or things weren't nested correctly, then Ant will break on trying to parse this. That's an important distinction. Whereas index.template doesn't matter. You can write HTML in any old way you want, and as long as it turns up in browser, you're okay. So there's lots more comments in here. So I've still got all these script templates that are used in my agility objects, but I can have big lumps of comment in there and it doesn't matter. This is the only downside with this approach, is that obviously you have to have two versions of these files. These are still working parts of your script. I mean, depending on your approach, then you can come up with better ways of dealing with that. And if anyone knows of a way of importing these scripts from a text file or a JS file or something like that, that would be handy. But otherwise, there's a duplication thing going on here. And to be honest, I mean, I'd probably start questioning whether the use of template files is actually the best way to go, and whether it might be better to do multi-line, inline HTML as JavaScript strings, which is something I said I didn't think was a good thing at the start, but I think maybe it's better than duplicating your HTML up here. Anyway, then we've got the main title of the page. So, oh yes, we're in the head now. You can see we're now in the head. And then we've got a link to our compiled CSS, and again that's a placeholder, and it doesn't exist in our source directory. So that's trying to look at source assets CSS. You can see in there we've got no file called compiled style, but that's something that will get generated out. And because it's a placeholder, it means that we can replace it. But while we're replacing it with the file name, we can replace it with a nice numbered versioned file, so we can follow effectively what's happening with the modernizer and jQuery libraries are doing something very similar, but we're going to write that automatically. We've got more stuff in here. So a lot of this HTML now is coming in from HTML5 boilerplate. So you've got some browser hacks for various bits and bobs. It's worth checking out HTML5 boilerplate. Could save you some time. But yeah, that's index.template. Okay, so how does this all end up looking, I suppose? Let's have a look at the output. So in the bin release, what you effectively have is you only have an index.html. There's no index.development or an index.template. And if we have a look at the index of the release folder, it is basically index.template with a couple of subtle differences. So here we've got a minimized CSS file in here. So rather than that placeholder, it's now been replaced with asset CSS, and then dk asset selector, then 0.1.40.min.css. Everything else should be the same as index.template, other than this line down here. So dk asset selector, and then we've got the minimized JS file down here. And then if we have a quick look at those files, minimized CSS looks like that. At the moment I've set up the UI compressor just to shove everything on a single line in both CSS and in JavaScript. So in JavaScript, it comes in here and you can see the minimizing has taken what variables it can to safely and make them as short as possible. But as you scroll along here, you can see that it starts getting a bit more verbose, and that's sort of the nature of the framework that I'm using. So, but yeah, it's still quite a lot of minimizing going on, and amazingly, this all still works, even when it's all like that. It's quite remarkable, really. In fact, we'll just run that again. So this is now bin release index.html, and as you can see, it's all working just as the other one does. It's just using those minimized files, which is quite cool. Okay, so how does the Ant script actually work? Okay, so what we've got is this Ant folder in here, and I like to just, like I say, I like to put all my other Ant stuff into a little subfolder, just because it's a bit neater than just having it all bombing about in the root of the project. So in here we've got two jar files. So there's a Java file for the YUI compressor, the Yahoo's compression tool, and then Ant contrib gives us a few other features, Ant tasks that are needed just to make all this stuff work. We've got a build properties file. If you're not familiar with Ant, this is basically where you try and keep all your sort of variables in here, and it basically means just by changing a couple of things in this build properties file, I can sort of affect quite large changes to the resulting outcome. So if I change the application name to DK sample application, for instance, and so I could set the version number back down to 0. So I've got, the way I work with the version number is major, minor, and then a build number. So, and it's this build number that gets incremented as we go through. So those are the two main properties that you probably need to change in this file. The rest of this stuff just tells it where to find various different files that the Ant scripts kind of need to work. And if you ever needed to, if you didn't like index.template, you want to call it index.release or something, you could rename the file and change this in here, and then it would give you that. And if you wanted to change the way that minimized files ended up coming out, so at the moment I've got the version number in here, but you could even get rid of the version number entirely. It's just all configured from this properties file here, which is quite nice. Then in the source folder, I've got some sub build scripts, I suppose is the best way of calling them. They're build scripts that are imported into the main build script. So if I have a look at the main build script, that's what we have. So this is my main build script. It's only 28 lines long, and the reason why it's only 28 lines long is because I've stripped a lot of stuff out into these import files here. But the main stuff we need is to bring in the properties file. So that just brings in all the property variables. These part here brings in all of those jar files, those Ant libraries, to give me a little bit more sort of functionality. Just because, like I say, out the box you don't get, Ant doesn't have Yahoo's JavaScript CSS compressor, and I also use a for each Ant task to actually do some parsing, and yeah, that's what this gives me here. Then I've got so my actual Ant build is basically broken into 4 different files. So stuff to do with the wrapper, stuff to do with versioning, stuff to do with compiling CSS, and stuff to do with compiling JS. And however you set it up, it's really up to you, but this is the way I like to work. And then finally we've got this main target here called build all, and then what that does, depends means it will run these particular Ant targets in this sort of sequence. So we've got some pre-build functions from the wrapper, we've got some versioning stuff going on, compiling the CSS, compiling the JavaScript, and then doing some wrapper post-build stuff. And then finally got a nice little message that gets spit out here. One thing to note as well, this is something I like to do, well, just seems quite a nice thing to do, is put a little description into the various targets that you think should be public. So anything with a description comes up as black in the ant panel in IntelliJ, and all the stuff with app descriptions come up as grey. So, and I also prefix them with underscores just to sort of denote that they're sort of private to that particular import file. But let's just run that and just show you what goes on. It doesn't take very long to run. Okay, so it's just going through now. Okay, so there you go. So that took 11 seconds to run. So if we just go from the bottom up, so you can see here it goes, DK sample application version 0.1.1 was built built successfully. I've put in a few different echoes out here. Let's see if I've got some. I did put some quite cool ones in actually. I put on the minimize scripts, for instance. It shows that before minimizing, the scripts were 38K, and after minimizing, they're 16K. So that's not a bad saving on the scripts sizes. And then I also did one for the styles. You can see I saved a massive 5K on the styles. That's partially because this project isn't very style sheet heavy at the moment, but it would become it if it turned into a proper project. But that's the ant sort of script running. But let's have a look at what it's actually produced. So if we go back into our bin release and look at our index template, so we got this thing called DK sample application 0.1.1. So remember, I changed the application name in build.properties, and I also I think I set the build number to 1, so now it's now actually at 2 because it's been incremented. And you can see this is the minimized file, now called DK sample application rather than whatever it was before. And then also at the top somewhere we've got the CSS, which has sort of inherited that sort of same name as well. So let's see how it's actually done that. What are the main things that build script is actually doing. So in the wrapper file, ignore the red stuff. What's happening is because it doesn't have access to the properties from the root. What I tend to do is I wrote all this stuff in build.xml and then moved it into a separate file once I'm sort of happy with it. Whether that's the best way of working, I'm not sure. If you've got a suggestion, let me know. What we've got pre-build options. So we've got clean and copy. So all I really want to do is delete the output folder. So just delete bin release because we're doing a new release, and then copy all the files, copy files to that output folder. You could set up some sort of backup system if you really wanted to, so it could archive off all your bin releases, but I'm not doing that. But it's pretty easy to do. But all I'm really doing is what I'm saying with the copy, for instance, is I'm just saying copy everything from the source directory into bin release. So at this point, bin release will just look like source. It will have index.template, index.html, index.development. They have all of the and it have all the stuff from the assets folder, but it won't have this anything else. So if you put anything else in subfolders outside of assets, it's not going to go across there either, i.e. my packaged stuff up here. So none of this stuff goes in there, so you can see there's none of that stuff. So I'm just copying those two things. So that's what it's doing in the pre-build operation. So we've just got that sort of set up. Then the next thing we do is we increment our version number. I think I just got this script from somewhere from doing some Googling. So it's pretty sort of standard, to run an operation on a value in your properties file. And then so it was on that value there. And all I've done is I've just added this nice little version string here, just so that gives me the nice full version number that I can play with. And as and when you sort of decide that you've made a major update or a minor update or minor releases, you can update these numbers, and they won't be affected by the automated build script, but the build number would be. So that's versioning, very basic. But the important thing is that we've now got this property here, which has the full version number in it. And in fact, actually, you can see that's how it's just been pulled. That version is just being pulled straight into the minimized output file there and there. Okay, we're going to look at the compiling the CSS stuff, and this is actually quite cool. So what we've basically got is we've got this parse body styles method. So what this target will do is it creates an XML property based on the development version of index.development.html, and then because it's created an XML property, it means I can then parse the HTML document as if it was an structured XML document, and as long as I'm writing, as long as I always keep it as valid, well-formed XML, that's okay. And then it means that I can then go into, for each, this is where I'm bringing in an ant contrib task, for each href in HTML body.link. I suppose let's just have a look at that so I can show you what it's trying to get at. So we're going from HTML. In fact, I know what I can do. I can go into here. So HTML body link. So yeah, I just use this to tell me the structure of my page. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty simple. So for every HTML body link, and then go back in there. .href. So for each one of them, do a concatenate style, and so in here I'm just concatenating them all into a single big file, which is just called the CSS output file, which I think is just application name.css. So these concatenated files actually get deleted before we see the release build, so you can't actually. But all it is it's just loads of different files that are all just sort of appended to each other, and that's what this ant concat target does here for us. So once the parse body styles has concatenated all of our style sheets, we then hit minimize styles, and then this is what invokes the YUI compressor. And you've got different options where you can change, like when it wraps on what line and whether it, I think the term is, I can't remember whether it obfuscates your stuff or not. And then what I've just done here, as well as I just added a nice little, I just worked out the length of the combined file and the length of the minimize file, and then I just write out that line here. So minimum output was built, and it was, and let's have a look at the, so minimize style. So you can see that echo message here says that file was built, it was some length of combined, and now it's the minimized length. So that was just, I just figured it's quite nice. I quite like to see metrics and stuff like that as I'm doing things, and I was quite curious to see how good the minimize library, how good it's actually doing. Considering I've only got like 4 CSS files and it's still knocking off 5K. I mean, I'm pretty pleased with that. Okay, so that's the sorting out all of our CSS stuff. Then we've got a compile.js. So if we go in here, so we've just done compile CSS build styles, and we're now going to do compile.js build scripts. Click on that, and that takes us into the compile.js, and this will do a very similar thing to the CSS one. So we've got the parse body scripts, and this time what it's doing is it's creating an XML property based on index.development.html again, and it's doing a for each, and this time it's doing a for each on the HTML body script source. So again, if we go in here, so HTML body script source, and if we go back to there, so for each one of them it's then concatenating those scripts, and it's just creating one big massive file with all of my JavaScripts all in one big file, and that's what that lump of ant is doing for us. And then, so once it's parsed all of those things, we'll then hit the minimize scripts target, and again, this does a very similar thing to the compile CSS one, where it invokes that Yahoo UI compressor thing for us. And then I've also got my little metrics again coming out there. So, and it's much better on the on the JavaScript. So you can see here, you can see target underscore minimize scripts. So that's that one. So then it lists all their various different things it spits out, and you can see there it was 38K, now it's 16K. So that's pretty nice. That's over 50% compression going on there, which is quite cool. Okay, and then if we go back to the build scripts, then we've got one more task to do, the wrapper post build. So the wrapper post build what we've got here is we've got tidy up and apply version numbers. So what we want to do in tidy up, what we're actually doing is we're renaming index.template.html to just whatever we want to call it. So in this case it's index.html. Then we're actually deleting index.development.html, and we're deleting the concatenated JavaScripts and the concatenated CSS. So you only end up with the minimized files in the main release folder. And then we've got this apply version numbers. So in here, what this is basically doing is it's doing a regular expression replace on index.html. You know, that's in theory that should actually be the that thing there, that property, rather than having it hard coded, because that would be better. And then what it does is it actually looks for, and I'm just looking for those placeholders. So it's a regular expression for that placeholder, and then just replacing it with whatever the minimized JavaScript and the minimized CSS should be. So that then ends up taking. So we're going to index. So if we look at index.template, we have this. So it's looking for that compiled script thing. So there, so I think, or was that compiled style? That might be compiled style. So it's looking for that, and then just replacing it, and then that ends up with that. So that's the automatic versioning, cache control, loads of stuff built into there, which is it's all pretty good. So that's basically how the build script works, and that's quite nice. But let's just say, for instance, you're actually doing some coding, and it doesn't really matter what you're doing. I know. For instance, I know that this on register actually gets called very near the start of the application, sort of booting up. So we're going to do hello world, and then if we go to index.template, just run that. So we get a nice hello world, and then you're in the application. But then say you wanted to get that into the release build as well. What I've done is I've got a release configuration in here. If I run that, you can see what it's actually doing is it's invoking all of that build script again for me. So it's running through the whole thing. So basically doing a big compile for me. And then, oops, decided to load it up in Firefox, but here you go, you've got the hello world. You can see we're actually in the release version of our code base, and even looking at the code source, so we've got the minimized script CSS there, and the minimized JS, and in this minimized JS, somewhere buried in there would be hello. Oh, there you go. So that's all compiled up, and that's kind of a nice. Again, that's sort of a throwback to how you might be working in, say, Flash Builder, and the way that is set up is nice and simple. So you've just got these release configurations, and all we have to do is you specify the release one, and then as you point it at bin release index.html, so that's always the file that's always getting built. Tell it what browser you want to launch in, and then in here I've got my run ant target, and in here you can specify which ant target you want to run. And I know build all does everything, so effectively anytime the release build configuration is invoked, it will run the whole build all ant script for me, run through all that nice stuff for me, and automatically chuck me out with a nice bin release folder with my latest stuff in it, all versioned, all nice and tidied away, with just a single index.html file in there. So I think that's it for this screencast. I hope that was interesting for you. I think it's actually a really nice way of working, because I think the thing that I'm most pleased with, to be honest, is definitely the parsing of the of all these script tags to give you the minimized files. I think that's a very, even I do say so myself, I think it's a very nice way of doing things. Yeah, I think with this kind of setup, which is actually very easy to transport, because effectively the way I've written it, all you need is you need the ant folder and you need the build.xml, and then as long as you follow this folder, this project structure, you don't really have to change much at all. And if you did have your files in totally different places with totally different names, and you just go through here and just have to rename a few other properties just to make it behave the way you wanted it to. But I've already transported this into a couple of different projects and just tweaked all the little values, and I found that it does sort of jump from project to project quite nicely. And it should be IDE independent as well. There's nothing in here that ties it into IntelliJ. Just a few of my workflows and stuff go into it, but the actual Ant script itself, if you wanted to, you can run it through command line, and depending on what IDE you're running, you could probably invoke command, just a command line, Ant build from command line, just to do your release builds for you if it didn't have Ant support built into the IDE. But yeah, so there we go. Yep, I think that's the end of the screencast. So thanks for listening.